It was December 1944. The Ardennes forest was a graveyard of skeletal trees, their branches clawing at a sky weighed down by snow. The wind was a physical force, sharp and cold, pushing the falling flakes sideways across the frozen earth. Inside a frozen M10 Wolverine tank destroyer, huddled beneath a camouflage net stiff with ice, Private First Class Ray Thompson watched through a fogged periscope. The world was reduced to a gray, blurry circle. His breath came in shallow bursts, misting in front of his face. His gloved hands trembled, not from fear, but from the bitter cold that seeped through every inch of metal and bone. The M10, a Wolverine, was an open-topped tank destroyer. It offered a powerful gun and good speed, but it offered its crew absolutely no protection from the elements. The wind cut straight through their wool uniforms, and the steel hull felt like a block of ice. Just 800 yards away, he saw them. First, he heard them a low, grinding rumble that vibrated in his teeth. Then, they emerged from the snow-laden pines, a line of German tanks snaking its way through the woods. Thompson counted 12 of them, mostly Panzer IV models, their long cannons menacing even at this distance. At the front, leading the column, was a Tiger one. Its square, snarling silhouette was unmistakable. Behind the armor, half-tracks rolled with infantry, and fuel trucks brought up the rear. They were heading toward a vital crossroad, a simple intersection in the snow that, if taken, would sever the last supply line to the 101st Airborne Division, currently encircled and fighting for their lives in Bastogne. Thompson had no orders. He had no permission to fire. His specific command was to wait, to observe, and to report. But he could see exactly what was about to happen. The 101st would be strangled. He made a decision. Without a single command, without clearance, Ray Thompson pulled the trigger, and everything changed. To understand that shot, you have to understand the rules. 3 days earlier, inside a drafty farmhouse near the Belgian front, Ray Thompson sat hunched over a cold metal desk. His commanding officer, Captain Langston, briefed the crew of the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion. "No one fires without confirmation from command," the officer said flatly, his words hanging in the frigid air. "I do not care what you see. I do not care how close they are. We do not give away our position unless ordered." The room was quiet. The men nodded, their faces grim. But there was a vibration of tension beneath the surface. Everyone knew the enemy was moving, and fast. Outside, the Battle of the Bulge was just beginning. On December 16th, under the cover of thick fog and heavy snow, the German army had launched its last, desperate major offensive on the Western Front. Codenamed Operation Watch on the Rhine, the goal was terrifyingly simple: split the Allied line in two, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. They hit with over 200,000 men, more than 1,000 tanks. And the benefit of absolute surprise, American lines buckled. Some units vanished overnight, swallowed by the German advance. Friendly positions changed by the hour. In the confusion, many commanders feared the worst enemy might not be in front, but friendly fire from behind. Communications were a mess of static and crossed wires. So the rule was clear, absolute, and born of panic: wait for orders. For Thompson, that meant observation duty. He and his 3-man crew were dug into a ridge near a forest road north of Noville, a crossroads town just outside Bastogne. They had good cover, ample range, and an icy view of the valley below. But they had no permission to engage. Day and night, Thompson scanned the terrain, logging everything in a notebook his mother had mailed him months ago. Range, bearing, wind speed. He did not fire. The discipline held. But as he watched that steel serpent slide toward the crossroads, the question changed. Was holding fire really the safer option? Who was Ray Thompson? Raymond Charles Thompson was not born a soldier. He was a product of the vast, flat nothingness of western Kansas, where the winter wind could peel paint off a barn and the summer heat baked the wheat fields until they cracked open. His father, Charles, ran a small engine repair shop, a place of grease, gears, and logical problems. His mother, Anna, taught 7th grade math, a woman who believed the world operated on knowable principles. Ray grew up, surrounded by both the tactile mechanics of his father and the abstract precision of his mother's graph paper. Even as a boy, he saw the world through angles and ratios. He could tell you exactly how far away a grain silo was just by the length of its shadow at a certain time of day. When other kids played with simple slingshots, Ray was building one with a pulley system and counterweights, obsessed with calculating the arc and distance of a pebble. He did not join the army because he was itching for a fight. He enlisted in 1942 because he wanted to study engineering, and the army offered him training, pay, and a future. He got the training. The pay was not much. The future, he learned, depended entirely on surviving Europe. By the time Thompson arrived in Normandy, he was 22 years old and already looked 30. His first combat experience was in the bocage, the nightmarish hedgerows where the enemy could be 10 feet away and you would not know it until their machine guns opened up. It was there he watched his friend, Jimmy Delgado, burn alive when a Panzerfaust caught their half-track in a roadside ditch. Another, Frank Murray, was vaporized by a mine outside St. Lo. After that, Thompson stopped believing in luck. He stopped believing in safe distances, and he began to question the infallibility of orders. He started believing only in patterns, in routines, in the observable, predictable geometry of war. He started carrying a small spiral notebook in his jacket. Every German vehicle he encountered, he would sketch it. He noted the vulnerabilities, yes, but more importantly, the habits associated with it. How long did it take for a Panzer Force turret to rotate 90 degrees? Where did a column commander pause to regroup? What was the standard interval between vehicles in an assault formation? He did not talk much. Other soldiers called him the quiet clock, because when he did speak, it was short, direct, and usually timed down to the second. 3 seconds, he might murmur, and 3 seconds later, an enemy mortar would fall exactly where he would predicted. As a gunner, he was deadly. Not flashy, not fast, just accurate. Predictable, in the best possible way. In the Army's view, he was a good gunner. Disciplined, smart, calm under fire. What they did not realize, what even his closest crewmates did not fully see, was that Ray Thompson was also a thinker, a tactician. He was not just a trigger puller. He was a man who could see a battlefield like a chessboard. No, not a chessboard that was too simple. He saw it as a complex geometry problem, a series of angles and vectors waiting for a solution. And in 3 days' time, that quiet kid from Kansas with the angle-obsessed brain would rewrite the rules of engagement in a single, devastating burst of unauthorized firepower. Because sometimes, war does not reward those who follow instructions. It rewards the ones who understand when to break them. On the morning of December 19th, 1944, the fog lay thick and low across the Ardennes. It was a suffocating, wet cold that clung to the branches like smoke and reduced the world to shades of gray. Vision was limited to 100 yards. Sound was distorted, muffled, and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Through his periscope, Ray Thompson saw them. Or, rather, he felt them first, a low-frequency vibration that hummed through the steel hull of his M10. Then, a shadow detached itself from the fog. First, the silhouette of a Tiger I tank. It was an unmistakable beast, a rolling fortress with its long 88mm cannon and snarling, square shoulders. It moved with a terrifying, arrogant confidence. Then, another shadow emerged behind it. And another. The German column was moving down the forest road like a steel serpent. Thompson counted 12 vehicles, maybe more, slipping in and out of the fog banks. It was a textbook armored assault column, clean, tight, and dangerously disciplined. At the front, the Tiger led like a battering ram, a vehicle capable of punching through nearly anything the Americans had. Behind it came 3 Panzer IV tanks, the workhorses of the Wehrmacht, each fast, efficient, and deadly. Then, 2 half-tracks, their interiors packed with the gray-green uniforms of Panzer Grenadiers, infantry meant to swarm and hold whatever the tanks broke. Behind them came the column's soft underbelly, support vehicles, ammunition trucks, and crucial fuel tankers. The tail end of the column was flanked by a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, a sign they were expecting contact and prepared for anything. Anything, that is. except one unapproved American gunner with a Wolverine. The road they were on was narrow, barely wider than the column itself. Steep forest banks rose on either side, and thick ancient trees hemmed them in. There was no room to maneuver, no room to scatter. To the German commander, this was a protected route. To Ray Thompson, it was not a road. It was a trap. It was a shooting gallery. But here was the catch. Ray had no orders. No one else could see what he saw. Radio contact with his battalion's forward HQ was weak, a garble of static and screams. The only way to reach command was to reposition the M10, break his camouflage, and risk immediate exposure. By protocol, he was supposed to observe the enemy, report their heading, and let air support or artillery take the lead. But there was no air support in this fog, and the artillery had no idea this target existed. Thompson was not watching a column in transit. He was watching a blade being aimed straight at the throat of the American line. That road, the one they were creeping down, led directly to the Noville crossroads. If they took Noville, they would flank the defenders at Bastogne from the north. The 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, already encircled and fighting in frozen foxholes, would lose their last major supply lifeline. The result would be a catastrophe. Tens of thousands of Americans would be cut off, starved, and annihilated in the cold. And yet, the tanks kept moving forward, calm, confident, protected by the belief that American forces were disorganized, scared, and stretched too thin to respond. They were half right. Ray Thompson was scared. He was cold. He was isolated. But he was not disorganized. He was calculating. He knew that if he fired too early, they would scatter. If he hit the wrong target, like the lead Tiger, the others might simply reverse or return fire with overwhelming force. But if he fired with precision, at just the right vehicles, in just the right order, he could do something most officers would say was impossible. He could dismantle an entire armored column, piece by piece, using their own discipline and the narrow road against them. And he would have to do it without a word from command, without backup, without permission. He licked his chapped lips, his glove sticking to the cold steel of the elevation dial. He took one last look at the formation, and waited for the moment no training manual had ever prepared him for. Ray Thompson had never fired without orders. Not once. Not in training, not in the hedgerows of France, not even days earlier when his instinct screamed as a lone Panzer crossed his scope. He was the quiet clock, a man who believed in discipline, in rules, in mathematics. But now, staring at a perfectly exposed German armored column, crawling forward with lethal confidence, he realized a cold, terrifying truth. Waiting was no longer caution. Waiting was complicity. Waiting was suicide not for him, but for the 10,000 men trapped in Bastogne. The rules of engagement were written for battles with clear communication and a stable front line. This was not that. This was chaos. He thought of his captain's flat command, "No one fires without confirmation." Then he thought of the 101st Airborne, out of ammo, freezing in foxholes, waiting for a relief that would be cut off by this very column. A court-martial was a certainty if he was wrong. Annihilation was a certainty if he did nothing. In the frozen silence of the M10, Thompson ran the calculation. He picked up his microphone. "HQ, this is nothing, just static." He tried again. Nothing. The decision was his alone. And so, with no radio contact, no green light, and no one to back him up, Ray Thompson made his choice. He adjusted the angle of his 76mm cannon. His breath held. He did not aim for the lead Tiger. That was a rookie's mistake. The Tiger was a fortress, designed to absorb punishment. Hitting it first would just alert the column. Instead, his eyes tracked down the line. He aimed for the third vehicle, a Panzer IV. He fired. The entire German column, as predicted, halted. Brakes hissed, engines growled in confusion. Thompson did not watch his handiwork. As his loader, a man named Rousseau, rammed in the next shell, a purely reflexive trained action, Thompson ordered his driver, "Move us." 5 yards left. The M10 lurched, its tracks biting the frozen mud, settling into a new position, just slightly angled from the first. It was enough to throw off any German gunner scanning for their muzzle flash. Thompson fired again. This time, he aimed for the sixth vehicle in line, the half-track carrying infantry. The blast ripped through its thin armor. Its fuel tank ignited instantly. Bodies were thrown into the trees as the vehicle was consumed by a fireball. The fire spread to the dry underbrush, lighting the forest floor in patches of orange and black. The Germans were no longer halted. They were panicking. The Tiger at the front tried to reverse, but the column was packed too tightly. The burning wreck of the 3rd Panzer blocked its path. The crew inside the Tiger shouted and gestured furiously, trying to clear a path. But behind them, the rest of the formation was now bottlenecked, blinded, burning, and boxed in. "Reload!" Thompson yelled, his voice cracking in the cold. Russo, now fully alert, slammed another round home. The crew, realizing what was happening, did not question him. They were in this. They followed his lead. Thompson fired the 3rd shot. The target, the 8th vehicle, a fuel truck. The result was instant and biblical. The explosion rocked the entire hillside, a concussive blast that jetted flames skyward like a volcanic eruption. The force knocked 2 nearby infantrymen to the ground. The fireball backlit the tank silhouettes like ghostly shadows in the fog. From a distance, it sounded like a full artillery ambush. In reality, it was one man, one gun, and a hypothesis. This order of shots was not random. It was not rage. It was the solution to his geometry problem. Thompson had spent months studying German doctrine. He knew their reliance on tight formations, knew the logic behind their placement, fuel and support in the rear, armor in front, infantry in the middle. By taking out the 3rd vehicle, he created a physical block. By hitting the 6th, he jammed the middle and unleashed infantry panic. By hitting the 8th, he crippled their retreat and ignited a chain reaction of fire and terror. It was a pattern designed for a controlled collapse. Each shot was a scalpel, not a hammer. The Germans, now confused and cut off, began firing wildly into the trees, their machine gunners riddling snowbanks and empty trunks, fighting ghosts. The Ardennes forest, silent just moments before, now screamed. The air, thick with fog, became thicker with smoke, shrapnel, and the smell of burning fuel. Trees cracked and fell under the shockwaves of Thompson's calculated shots. Snow, fire, and steel filled the air like confetti from a hellish celebration. Thompson's 3rd shot, the one that hit the fuel truck, had set off a secondary explosion in an ammunition carrier behind it. His 4th shot struck a half-track that had tried to reverse, its wheels already spinning uselessly in the icy mud. The shell hit, and the chassis was thrown skyward in a twisted arc of metal. The German Tiger at the front, the apex predator of this steel column, was now completely stuck. The crew tried desperately to reverse, to pivot, to bring its devastating 88mm gun to bear. But they were trapped between the flaming wreckage of the Panzer 4 inches front of them and the growing pileup of vehicles behind that could not move without ramming each other. Their own tight, disciplined formation, so effective in open terrain, had become a steel coffin inside the narrow forest road. From Thompson's vantage point, everything moved with a terrible, slow clarity. He saw German soldiers yelling, their arms waving as officers tried to restore order. But confusion was turning to raw panic. German infantry began to scatter into the woods, abandoning their vehicles, seeking any cover they could find. Some took shelter behind trees, only to be hit by shrapnel from their own exploding trucks. Others sprinted wildly into the snow, stumbling and slipping on frozen roots. One officer, in a futile attempt to regain control, climbed on top of his tank to get a better view. He was cut down by a precise 3-round burst from Thompson's coaxial 50 caliber machine gun. Inside the M10, the crew was sweating, despite the sub-zero temperature. The small compartment smelled of grease, hot metal, and cordite. The loader's hands were raw and blistered from the rhythm of slamming shells into the breech. The assistant gunner's voice was hoarse from yelling range corrections. But Ray Thompson was ice. He was a machine executing a program. Every shot he took came from calculation, not adrenaline. Not rage, not revenge for his friends in Normandy, just pure, practiced mathematics. He was repositioning after every 2 shells. Not far. 10 yards here, 20 there. Just enough. The M10's engine would roar for a few seconds, lurching to its new firing position, then fall silent. This tactic was devastatingly effective. German gunners, peering through the smoke and fog, could not get a fix. The smoke helped. The fog helped. The terrain helped. But the real advantage was psychological. They thought there were more of him. They believed they had stumbled into a perfectly orchestrated, multi-unit ambush. The Tiger crew finally managed to pivot their massive turret, rotating it toward the ridge where Thompson had fired from last. The long cannons searched the trees. Thompson did not flinch. He waited. He knew the Tiger's armor was thickest in the front, almost impregnable, but he also knew its weakness was its flank, and its turret traverse was slow. And if you knew the exact moment when it turned, when the hull exposed just a sliver of its side during repositioning, that was your window. The Tiger fired, a deafening blast that tore a nearby pine tree in half. The shell was high and wide. Before the German crew could adjust, Thompson had his shot. Now, he whispered. The fifth shell left the barrel and struck home. A bright, hot flash tore through the Tiger's side, just below the turret ring. For a second, it held, as if the 70-ton beast was refusing to die. Then, the internal ammunition cooked off. The entire turret, weighing over 10 tons, launched upward in a plume of white-hot fire, landing several yards away in the snow. The blast was so violent it knocked the German anti-aircraft gun at the rear of the column off balance. Its stunned gunners dropped their weapons and fled into the trees. Smoke now poured into the forest like low-lying clouds. The wreckage glowed beneath the gray morning light, and the road that had once been a pipeline of armored strength was now a burning, impossible bottleneck of destruction. One of Thompson's crewmen, Russo, looked at him, his face pale beneath the grime. Jesus. Ray, are we still going to get court-martialed for this? Thompson did not answer. He just wiped the fog from his periscope. Reload, he said. The job was not finished. Hours later, in a makeshift American holding tent, a captured German lieutenant sat shivering. His face was smudged with ash, his greatcoat half burned, and his eyes glassy with shock. He struggled to find the words as an American intelligence officer questioned him. He spoke in fits, stammered, and paused, reliving the nightmare. There were many guns, he said in broken English, his hands trembling. Many, maybe 6. Maybe more. We were attacked by a full battery. From the hills, from everywhere. The American intelligence officers exchanged glances. They checked their maps. There had not been a battery. According to their field reports, there had not even been a full platoon in that sector. There was just one M10 Wolverine and a gunner who officially had never been given permission to fire. Other German prisoners, rounded up from the frozen woods, described it differently. Their accounts were contradictory, embellished by terror and confusion. Some said it was an ambush laid by elite paratroopers who had appeared from the snow with handheld anti-tank weapons. Others claimed the Americans had planted sophisticated mines and booby traps, evidence of sabotage, not gunnery. One man, a private barely 20 years old, swore he saw muzzle flashes from 3 different angles simultaneously. But the flash pattern had come from one source, Ray Thompson, who had moved his M10 after every 2 shots, using the fog and smoke as a curtain. In their panic, the Germans had begun to invent enemies that did not exist. Fear filled in the blanks. Even seasoned tank commanders reported seeing American armor silhouettes deeper in the trees, phantoms created by the play of firelight on the fog. In the chaos of burning wrecks, disintegrating command chains, and the terrifying methodical precision of the incoming fire, they imagined what they could not identify. It was not cowardice, it was psychology. They simply could not believe that one man, one gun, had done this. To their trained, professional minds, it was an impossibility. A single tank destroyer could not have struck with such timing, such devastating precision, and such tactical brilliance. And in a way, they were right. This had not been an attack of brute force. This had been a surgical disruption. Thompson's decision to fire at specific targets, the 3rd, 6th, and 8th vehicles followed, a cold logic that no German unit had prepared for. German doctrine taught that American forces were slow to respond, overly reliant on orders from above, and predictable. The assumption was that Americans were efficient only in overwhelming numbers, not in individual improvisation. But Thompson had violated that expectation. He had thought like a German commander, anticipated their response, and then struck like a ghost. One prisoner described it as if the trees themselves had opened fire. When American forces moved in to clear the road hours later, what they found stunned even the most hardened veterans. The wreckage looked like the aftermath of a coordinated airstrike. Vehicles were stacked like dominoes, their burned-out frames fused together by the intense heat. Frozen corpses were sprawled across the snow. Trees were splintered like toothpicks. But above all, what made the scene so strange, so eerie, was the absence of American dead. There were none. There were no American foxholes, no empty shell casings from a battery, nothing. There had only ever been one gunner. From that day forward, survivors from that German column would refer to the incident by a single haunted phrase, Die Geisterbatterie, the Ghost Battery. For 48 hours, Ray Thompson expected to be arrested. After the last echo of the explosions died, after the smoke began to thin and the only sound was the crackle of burning wreckage, he sat inside the M10, motionless. His loader, Russo, offered him a sip from a canteen. Thompson did not respond. The adrenaline, the icy calculation had drained away, leaving a hollow dread. They had disobeyed a direct, explicit order. They had fired without permission. And regardless of how many enemy tanks were now burning in the snow, the military had rules. Rules were the only thing separating an army from a mob. Back at the battalion headquarters, a damp cellar beneath a ruined Belgian farmhouse, Thompson filed his report. His commanding officer, Captain Langston, a career soldier from Pittsburgh, read it without saying a word. His face was a mask of anger, disbelief, and something else. Grudging awe. He flipped through the pages. Thompson's neat sketches of the column, the range estimates, the diagram of his firing sequence with the 3rd, 6th, and 8th vehicles circled. "You know," Langston finally said, his voice dangerously quiet, "if this had gone wrong, if even one of those vehicles had been friendly, I would be signing your execution order." Thompson, his face gray with fatigue, simply nodded. He did not make excuses. "I knew what I saw, sir." Langston stared at him, then exhaled, a cloud of steam in the frigid air. "No one authorized this, Thompson. You understand that. This was not your call." "I do, sir." Langston did not reprimand him. Not yet. He folded the report. "Go get some rest. You and your crew are off duty. I have got to send this upstairs." Upstairs meant division command, which meant scrutiny, which often meant punishment, especially for an enlisted man who acted outside protocol. Thompson returned to his crew. They were quiet too. No backslapping, no celebration. They were all waiting for the hammer to fall. But it did not. Blackened German steel. They asked Captain Langston which unit took it out. Langston, holding Thompson's report, said it was not a unit. It was one gunner. Word spread faster than official orders. At mess tents, in supply lines, across battalion radios, soldiers began talking about the guy from Kansas who took out an entire panzer column by himself. The legend of the Ghost Battery, born from German fear, was now retold with American pride. The official investigation was swift. Division intelligence reviewed Thompson's field notes. They interviewed his loader and driver. They confirmed the radio logs. Thompson's attempts to report had been met with nothing but static. But what they could confirm, without a shadow of a doubt, was the kill count. 7 German vehicles completely destroyed, including a Tiger. 4 more disabled. The entire column shattered. 0 American casualties. 1 strategic objective Noville's North Road held. 1 airborne unit, cut off and under siege, reconnected to its supply lines. Langston was called in to receive the final disposition. He expected a reprimand. What came instead was something more unusual. The division commander said, "Don't put this in the official briefing, but tell your gunner, we will be watching his work." Ray Thompson never received a medal for it. Not then. But he was not court-martialed. In fact, he was quietly reassigned to train other gunners on firing pattern theory, how to disable convoys through sequence rather than brute force. No one said the word hero, but his diagrams, sketched in a cheap notebook, were sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to the U.S. Army Artillery School. They had not just forgiven what he did. They were studying it. Weeks later, Langston found Thompson cleaning the breech of his cannon. "I was ready to report you for insubordination, you know," Langston said. Thompson looked up, his hands black with grease. Langston shrugged. "But then I read that line in your notebook. The one about controlled collapse. What did you mean by that?" Thompson paused, wiping his hands on a rag. "When you pull one stone from a wall," he said quietly, "the rest falls. If you know which stone to pull." After the war, Ray Thompson went home to Kansas. He married, started a small repair shop, and fixed tractors. He never spoke of what he did. He never called himself a hero, but the Army did. Years later, they began teaching asymmetrical engagement sequencing. The case study, a single, unclassified engagement outside Noville. Decades later, a military historian tracked down Thompson, now an old man. When asked why he did not wait for orders, Ray replied, "Because by the time the radio worked, it would have been too late. I did not break the rules. I just stepped past them for a minute, long enough to do what had to be done." Ray Thompson did not win the war, but he saved a road. He saved a division. And he reminded an entire army that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it calculates, and sometimes it pulls the trigger not out of defiance, but out of a deeper duty.